teach historical European martial arts. These guys are going to talk you through that while a few of us demonstrate the weapons. You can see we got a ton of weapons we brought with us. What we're really going to do today is a combination of talk to you about how we fight, what is historical European HEMA, what does that mean, the weapons we use, how they're historically relevant, and then we're going to kind of take you through a progression of those weapons up to modern day and some churning knives that we have that are actually shock knives and have a little buzz and crackle to them. You'll see that. So these guys are going to do most of the talking because you don't want to hear me talk. Lex, Caleb, and I are going to fight, plus these guys are going to fight. So if you guys have any questions, we'll definitely do questions as we go through. So turn over to these guys. All right, just Justin and Rocky, I'll let you guys introduce yourselves.
How's everybody doing tonight? My name is Justin Hernandez. I'm one of the instructors at Columbus Saber Academy. My primary focus is military saber and more modern HEMA. And this is my partner in crime here, Rocky Willis.
Hey everyone, I'm Rock. I am the reluctant longsword instructor over at CSA by virtue of them asking me to do it. So, we thought probably the best way to start off would be to tell you guys what the heck is HEMA, right? I mean, Tom has talked about this. HEMA stands for Historical European Martial Arts. Really what we want to focus on more than anything is the historicity of the martial art. And HEMA is a little different than how you'd see kind of more mainstream martial arts. A lot of people know Eastern martial arts, right? Because they exist with living lineages, where you might have Japanese or Korean or Chinese martial arts, where people have studied them and practiced them, and there's a lineage of master teaching it to student, the student becoming a master, and so on and so on. And over generations, these martial arts live on that way. HEMA doesn't really exist that way. HEMA is a little different. HEMA, in a lot of ways, is a dead martial art that's kind of been resurrected in a way. It's a little different with some of the modern weapons that I teach. So you guys are probably aware that there's fencing in the Olympics, and there's saber and foil and epee. And so we have a little bit of a lineage for things like our military weapons. But going back, we kind of have a broken line of teaching, or a broken pedagogy of how to go about learning about these arts. So to us, one of the main things that we're always going to go back to is historical texts and sources or manuals. And maybe, Rock, you can kind of tell us about some of the early manuals and how kind of HEMA got started with folks kind of resurrecting old material. Yeah. So let's start with source material. What is a source? So luckily for us, the people in the past would write down notes on how they thought fencing could be conducted. Some of these can be very instructional and straightforward. Some of these read more like PhD thesis statements on the topic of fencing. They can be quite rough to work from because they're written in dead languages. So there's a lot of work that's been put into translating, transcribing, and making these workable. Just to get into it, the earliest manuscript we have access to is actually leveling referred to as 133, or if you want to mess with the sword and buckler nerds, you call it I-33 and let them rant. And it is just a giant book of monks teaching scholars how to fight with a weapon system called sword and buckler, which Tom is walking towards. So everybody kind of knows what a sword is, but let's get a little bit more specific. The sword Tom is holding is what's known in the modern term as an arming sword. It's kind of the one-handed medieval knightly sword, and they were in use for a very, very long time. Even up into the late Renaissance, you would see swords with just simple cruciform hilts. Wasn't always used with a buckler, but the manuscript shows entirely the sword being used with a buckler, so it's typically paired with one. The buckler, which is in his other hand, is a tiny itty-bitty little shield. They are extremely effective in the context of a one-on-one fight, because like on a battlefield, I would want to use a bigger shield because people are shooting stuff at me. Or I've got spears to block and I'm forming a line. In a one-on-one fight, I really don't need that giant shield to cut off the lines. I just need that little wall in the way.
Yeah, there you go. Look at them pretending they know what they're doing. So a lot of what you're using the buckler for in earlier systems isn't necessarily as a shield as you would expect it. It is more like a detached handguard, right? Your primary purpose for it is to protect your lead hand, and your main goal when fighting an opponent is to bind their blade out with your sword. So let's say Tom throws a cut at Lex. Lex is not going to try to parry with the buckler. She's going to try to catch the sword with hers, then use the buckler to control the weapon and hit her opponent. There's a lot of emphasis put on controlling the opponent's weapon before you go for any kind of strike, because unlike in, say, unarmed martial arts where you can kind of trade, right? Like, yeah, that guy can punch me in the chest as long as I can get him in the head, or, you know, I can kick him in the leg or something. In a sword fight, if you trade, you just both die. So yeah, you don't want to do that. So step one, don't get hit, control the opponent's weapon. You do that mostly with the sword, and then you use the buckler to cover it after. There you go. Yeah, now he died. Good.
That's how we make friends, guys.
He's not wrong. So, going down the line, skipping about 100 years, we start to see various forms of two-handed sword being used. So, modern terms, these are referred to as longswords. And categorically, a longsword is just literally any sword you can hold with two hands. There's no real specific measurements for it. Some of them are as short as arming swords, some of them much longer. But they start appearing much later. And the context, we don't really know 100% why. Some guesses I've heard is that if you're wearing really good armor, you don't really need a shield, and then you just have a spare hand, so why not have a bigger sword? Other contexts are so many people got in sword and buckler fights in the street that they just banned bucklers, so why not just have a two-handed sword? And I guess other people probably just thought, hey, my sword's bigger, that's cool, I like it. So we typically start seeing manuscripts for these about the mid-1400s, about the 30 Years' War. So the main difference between a longsword, a two-handed sword, and a one-handed sword is actually not what most people expect. Most of us are conditioned by like D&D and video games. So we think, oh, it's a two-handed sword, it probably has more reach and more power, but that isn't entirely the case. All things being equal, a one-handed sword typically has more reach than a two-handed sword because of the way you have to hold it. So yeah, like arming sword versus Lex's Ensifer, because they're about the same. There you go. With Tom's one-handed sword, he can send his primary shoulder forward, gaining more reach. Since Lex has to keep both hands on her sword, her shoulders have to be more square, which pulls the sword back. So all things being considered, the one-handed sword typically has the reach advantage. The advantage of the two-handed sword is speed. Its ability to redirect where it's moving is kind of unparalleled. Yeah, there you go. So in the early days of HEMA, longsword was kind of the golden boy. Everyone really did it because it's a two-handed sword and thusly cool. And to this day, it's still definitely the most popular weapon out there. Pretty much every HEMA tournament you go to is a longsword tournament unless specified otherwise.
Why do you think it is the most popular weapon that we have in HEMA?
Because it's cool. It's objectively cooler because two hands.
I know that when HEMA was starting, there was... Well, I know when HEMA was starting, there was a big push to kind of differentiate a style of historical fencing from more modern fencing. Do you think that longsword kind of became the poster child of that because it was so different than modern fencing weapons?
Yeah, I would say if the people in the early days kind of wanted to differentiate themselves from Olympic fencing and the SCA, which did mostly rapier at the time. So longsword was kind of the best way to do that. So end of the day, it's still definitely the most popular weapon set. Oh, look, a rapier.
We'll kind of mention some other organizations as we go. If you guys aren't familiar with the SCA, it's a really cool organization, but it stands for the Society of Creative Anachronism. They really focus more on the cultural aspect of a lot of historical martial arts, and they'll tend to do just a little different style of historical martial arts, probably a little bit lighter, and a lot of times they're not used as many steel weapons, though you've started to see a lot more steel weapons kind of crop up in that organization. The style of historical martial arts that we do is a little more like sport focused, though not sporty like Olympic fencing, I should say.
So let's talk a little bit more about what makes longswords cool and what makes them really popular.
Of course.
So most European swords that we know of tend to have two edges, right? And in a sword fight, you actually want to make use of both of those edges. They're perfectly symmetrical most of the time. But what you have is, if you guys both go out into like long point, yeah, there you go. So the edge that is facing away from the body is what's referred to as the long edge, and the reversed edge is the short edge. This usually refers more to how much reach or the angle between the forearms that the weapon has. And in a fight, you actually want to alternate between which edge you're using. So 2 actions using the long edge is going to be longer than 2 actions using the short and then the long edge, or reversing between the two. There you go. Along with 2 edges, a longsword also has a point, which I'm hoping the point of is pretty obvious, right? Like you stab people with it. Most people expect these to be primarily cutting weapons, but they're actually devastating thrusting weapons as well. I just volunteered Tom to get stabbed. There you go. So most of the earlier longsword systems typically advocate for a cut and then thrust methodology. So what they want to do is cut to control the opponent's weapon and then bury the point in them. Cool. So longswords were actually really, really popular for a very long time, mostly with like other fencing enthusiasts. Most people that were kind of commoners still kind of relied on one-handed swords. And along the way, through the Renaissance, I guess they got tired of getting hit in the hands because they started adding a lot of rings to the outside of their swords. That guy. There you go. So about 1530, 1550, you really start to see that style of sword become very popular. They were easy to carry, very effective. They look really pretty.
And that style especially was popular in Southern Europe at the time. In Northern Europe, you'd see a sword kind of like this pop up. And these swords were contemporaries. They were kind of both complex hilted swords. Both of them come out of the same kind of lineage as a cruciform, cross-hilted arming sword. And that way, they just kind of kept adding rings, more and more rings. And this way, they started enclosing the hand. So, you know, the sword and buckler kind of became one thing. Your hand just became a tank.
So, along the way, once you start getting into like the 1600s, that style of sword starts to go away, and you start to see most of the manuscripts start focusing on a single weapon type, which is what we would call today as a rapier.
Yeah, the word rapier probably originates from a Spanish word called espada ropera. And so that became kind of anglicized and turned into rapier, because the English are really good at pronouncing things. And you start to see different styles of rapier pop up. Now, Tom's holding a sword in either hand. A lot of times, now he's not holding both swords. A lot of times nowadays in kind of HEMA nomenclature, we typically like apply names to swords that might not necessarily have been. The sword that he was just holding a lot of times is called a side sword, which is kind of an arbitrary name. It comes from an Italian word called spada di lato, which just means sword worn at the side. But that was all swords, really. If you were carrying a sword, you probably wore it somewhere. Espada ropera, rapiers start to come into play definitely late 1500s, and by the early 1600s, they're probably the sword in most cities. You still see shorter cut and thrust versions in play, but this kind of becomes very in vogue across Southern Europe. In England, especially around the time of Queen Elizabeth I, this kind of sword was really the cat's pajamas, if you will. And then we start to see a couple of different styles, which we'll demonstrate here in a few minutes. Tom kind of specialized more in an Italian style, and I tend to practice more of a Spanish style of rapier. The primary difference being Italian sword fighting really turned into what we see a lot of times as modern sword fighting today. We started to see the numbered guards pop up around the 1530s with a master named Camillo Agrippa. And then that progresses, and those same guards are still used today in sport fencing. They're modified a little bit, but they basically still apply. So we'll kind of show you how these weapons would have been used. To talk real quick about how we're dressing up here, as you see people gearing up. These are the jackets that we use. We're calling them gambesons. You know, historically, gambesons would look a little different. But this is kind of like if you took a fencing uniform and it had a love child with a bear suit. They kind of turn into something like this. We do wear a fencing mask. The fencing mask is made of a thicker, more protective type of mesh. It has more padding on the inside of the mask, so that if we get hit in the head, which we do a lot, right, which is why some of us talk funny, there's really going to be no lasting effects. It is still a full contact sport, so safety is really, really important to us, but more than just safety, it's respect for our friends and respect for our opponents as we fence.
And you'll see the gear, so as Justin said, right, safety is super important for us. So we gear up because we want to fight tomorrow and keep fighting with our partners. So when we fight and we show off these weapons, we're not going 100%. We're not trying to kill our opponents. Sometimes we're not even trying to win. We're trying to practice and learn and get better, right? Everything, all the soft parts, you can see protection, knees, shins, elbows. You can see they've all put on gorgets, which are the throat protection. These weapons all thrust. I was bending all the weapons. They all can be and you don't want to get hit in the throat with it, so this protection is super important. Usually forearm guards like Justin and Rock have on, heavy gloves because fingers and bones are very, very brittle, and these will break fingers. We have all gotten injuries. These are impact weapons. It's kind of part and parcel to what we do. It just happens. The best of situations always have some problem. You know, you never know what happens. What do you guys want to fight with? We'll start from the beginning. Let's do some sword and buckler. So see some fights? Awesome. So we're going to start with sword and buckler and kind of progress from there. We all have our favorites that we fight with. Like Justin runs our saber program, Rocky runs our longsword program, Lex runs our women's longsword program. And yes, there is no benefit or not, gender, size, doesn't matter. We have a great set of fighters all across anything possibly can happen, and be some great fighters at the school. So, who's doing sword and buckler? Me?
Yeah, you do.
Okay.
I don't think anyone else knows how to do sword and buckler over here.
Oh, sorry.
Ow. So for reference, we're going to go a little slower than we normally go, mostly to help you all track the action and see what's happening. And also because we fought earlier, we're very tired.
And none of this is scripted, right? This is free-form fighting. I'm looking at what Rock is doing and trying to find an opening and capitalize on it. Same time, he's looking at what I'm doing and trying to find an opening and capitalizing on it. We will score our own hits. So if I get hit, I'll acknowledge it. We'll stop. We'll reset. We'll start again. Right? We're not just sitting there trying to bash, 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 bash all the way down the road. So.
Yeah, you can use you can use the army sword if you want. To help everyone see what happened there.
So guys, they're putting out the buckler in front of them to try to close off a line here. We're always thinking in terms of lines and angles when we do fencing. The other thing that we're doing with a two-handed weapon system is we're trying to take advantage of what we call tempo. And tempo to us is a little different than you think of tempo when you think like something like music. Tempo to us is kind of like how we measure the timing of our actions in swordplay. So typically, if somebody takes a strike at somebody else and they have a buckler out in front of them, then you're trying to work out of the second tempo. If your opponent starts an action, then you want to try to react and act on what we call the second intention, so they can find their openings that way. So now they're going to go regular speed. One thing that you'll see is really common in sword and buckler fighting is they'll change levels, right? So if one person attacks high and they're able to defend, usually the second person's going to go ahead and attack low.
One more.
All right, thank you, Tom and Rock.
Who are you next?
Switch to.
This is long sword. Huh? It's long sword.
Right, the next weapon we're going to demo then, as we're progressing kind of through the history of these different swords, is our long sword.
All right, let's see how good my John Madden impersonation is.
To demonstrate some plays.
No, just fight.
Just want to go?
Yep, that was a head hit from Tom. So you'll notice with the longswords, most of their target area is above the shoulders. That's for a very specific reason. One, it maximizes the reach of the weapon. Two, if one of them goes for a lower target area, it's very easy for the other person to land a strike to their head immediately before, after, or during. You're unable to cover yourself if your sword is too low. So you generally only want to strike a lower target when you're absolutely sure they can't hit you. Otherwise, stay playing high. There you go. What was next? Did we bring 2 side swords? Okay, we'll do side sword.
Did I hit a nerve?
Very above the car.
Ouch. Side swords.
So, side swords. The guys went through this earlier. Short rapiers, complex guarded arming swords, kind of like a hybrid transitional weapon, right? It wasn't as long as a rapier became. It had more hand protection than an arming sword, so you didn't need the buckler, right? But it was still short enough and light enough. You'll see a lot of wrist cuts, cavazioni, a lot of Italian, a lot of circular movements of their arms. Now, Justin and Rock have very different styles in fighting this, so it's kind of cool to see. That's kind of the great thing about a lot of us we all had various sword backgrounds before we came together, and we started CSA back in 2015. So 7 years now, wow. So all of us had kind of different backgrounds coming together, so it's really great when we fight because we all get to see different things and different perspectives. And that's really one of the great things about fencing. Yes, you need to take your hat off. All right. So as you can see, it's all about trying to close the line, meaning trying to cut off opportunities of attack to your opponent. So you see Rock and Justin both kind of changing their hand guards, moving that blade around back and forth. Guys, take a step back toward me a little bit. Rock, come back. Yeah, you're in the middle. There you go. Cool. So it's a lot of close, tight movements. Right. It's not about throwing the strike. It's about finding the opening, right? Being as efficient. Because again, even though we have gear on and yeah, I can get hit all day and it doesn't hurt that much, I don't want to get hit because that's the objective of sword fighting is not getting hit. We have 3 rules. Don't get hit, hit your opponent, don't get hit back, right? And that's why we're always trying to find that opening. again, with the evolution of the side sword, the cuts got quicker. One hands, a lot of wrist movements, not a lot of shoulder movements, right? A lot of wrist movement, a lot of quicker cuts, a lot of smaller cuts like you just saw, sneaky little things that come in. But it also started to evolve into more of a thrusting-oriented weapon, which is what came into the rapier, and usually Rock just thrusted Justin, so perfect timing, guys. He wasn't listening, so it just kind of was coincidence. So while they're fighting, for HEMA, and in the tournaments that we participate in, target areas are everything from the ankles up, right? Typically the groin, the back of the head, the spine are not scoreable targets, so we shouldn't be targeting to try to hit them. But everywhere else in the body is full game. So you'll see cuts to the leg, you'll see thrusts to the thighs, you'll see cuts to the hand and the fingers. There's nothing wrong with the cut to the fingers. It's a valid target area. But then again, an ending strike to the head or to the torso is more desirable in some cases. So various treaties and doctrines and books over the years talk about different body positions. Some call them guards, some call them postures, some call them stances, Japanese call them kamae. They're transitional positions. They're places you put your body in to encourage your opponent to attack, or it's places you find yourself in after a series of events and sequence of movements. It all kind of opens up different lines the way they stand. Rock's left hand is across his chest, Justin is on his hip. Both valid and equal, and both give them opportunity to use that hand when they need to, just as you saw the guys do. And yes, these lights are very hot, and these jackets are very heavy. Good fight, guys. Rapier or military saber next? Rapier, all right. You want to go? Cool.
They're doing rapier and dagger.
Rapier or rapier dagger?
Rapier and dagger is more dynamic.
What's that?
Rapier and dagger is more dynamic.
Start with rapier and go to dagger, or you want to do both? All right, cool.
So for context, Tom and Justin are actually using two completely different systems right now. Tom is fencing in the more Italian tradition. Justin is fencing in the more Spanish tradition. Big differences between the two is the Italian tradition tends to be extremely linear. The Spanish tradition tends to use oblique steps to open up lines more. So you'll see Justin moving backwards and forwards, left and right, looking for lines. Tom simply tries to exist on the line at all given times. And while it's kind of a commonly accepted myth that rapiers can't cut, rapiers can cut quite well, right? They're very stiff blades. They tend to cut fairly well. I mean, you're likely to sever an arm with one, but you're going to disable your opponent if you happen to cut them. The problem is they're really long and really heavy, so they take a long time to cut. Tom went for the grab and got stabbed in the throat for it. Cheeky. Up, and now the daggers come out. So, you know, 4 pointy things. And the dagger in this case is much like the buckler earlier. They're using it to cut off certain lines from their opponent and to constrain their opponent's blade more than they are just trying to actually stab each other with it. Though if they happen to end up in that position, well, why not? So you'll see a lot of thrust during rapier, and you'll notice that the blades flex quite a bit. One, this is kind of a feature because the amount of people that are willing to let me hit them with a sword is pretty limited, and we like to keep each other in good condition. But for reference, in a sharp sword fight, those would be piercing. Since they're not piercing and they're getting stopped on the jacket, that blade has to get displaced somewhere. So the amount that that blade bends upward is pretty equal with the amount of penetration it would have had. It may not look like much, but Tom is a rather thin individual. He's only like 3 or 4 inches wide, so if you see a 3 or 4 inch bend up, he's been completely run through. Ah, good throat stab. Good work, gents. So, we've thrown a lot of information at you guys so far. We kept it kind of high level just to avoid short-circuiting everyone. Is there any questions anyone has, like anything at all? Oh, sweet, I see hands. I like hands. We'll go from front row to back row. Which one am I the best at? That depends on any given day. Right now, you're seeing us at our absolute sloppiest. Mostly because we've all been fighting, haven't had enough electrolytes. In our club, we actually have the #1 rated military saber fencer. In the world, so that's kind of cool. We've got multiple people in the top 500 for longsword, multiple people in the top 500 for rapier and dagger. The reality is, like, the best of us is just any given day, but we're all, I like to think, fairly competent.
We always get that question, like, what's the best weapon, right? Whichever one you like, because that's the one you're going to practice, and that means you're going to get better at it if you practice, right? We have the fortunate benefit of having a lot of different weapons at our disposal. We primarily at the school teach longsword, military saber, and rapier, but as you see, we play with side sword and sword with bucklers. There's some passion projects that we all have that we're all, excited about, and we do those things all the time because we love them. But we know that the tournaments, what we fight, what we do for, those are the 3 primary weapons that we find ourselves using.
Wait, was that the question?
I don't know. I added a question.
I hope not, otherwise I get hit in the head way too much.
No, well, you answered the question. I just added more.
You're next.
Since HEMA has been kind of resurrected, as you said, has there been a concentrated effort to modernize the literature and make it more mainstream?
Yes and no. So there are a lot of people who typically translate systems and then kind of make a book on their take on the system. There's quite a few of those out there.
Let's go ahead and repeat that question for the crowd so everybody can hear that. What was the question exactly you're trying to answer?
Okay. The question was, has there been any attempt to modernize the manuscripts?
Gotcha.
Yes, there's like I said, there's several books out there now published from people who have been fighting in HEMA for quite a while. They're all really good. I'm not really going to list them here because there's too many. I will give a shout out to my boy Connor Kemp-Cow out in Philly for making an actually good take on a really esoteric Italian system. So if you want to learn like spaghetti longsword, you should go buy his book.
I will say on that note, too, that there's been a great effort not to modernize a lot of the fencing because it should look different than a lot of modern fencing. Unfortunately, one of the side effects of having tournaments and competing against other schools and things like that is it can get very sporty. And just like modern fencing doesn't really reflect sword play, we're really trying to keep HEMA in the sense that these are really simulating something that would have been at one time. And so there's always kind of that balance that we're trying to strike between, we got to modernize it because we got to teach it to people. Not everybody's into like the historical text. Some people just want to come in and learn a thing and do it. And other people are really into the historicity of it. So it's always kind of a balance we're trying to strike.
Okay, I see still more questions. You're next.
Is there any specific reason why you have two different color socks on?
So red ones go faster. That is an objective rule. I like my right leg to go faster than my left leg.
We all copy him.
Also, it's because all of us wear all black, and so does literally everyone else who does HEMA. So when I'm looking for myself in tournament footage, I just have to look for the dude wearing weird socks. Okay. So swords are sharp, but they're not lightsabers. Unless a sword is moving, it's not cutting. So if I can arrest Tom's sword, I can grab it, but I have to do it in a very specific manner. I don't want to grab on the edge. What I actually do is I put my thumb on the flat here, and I pinch. And that keeps the edge off of my hands. That's highly dependent. If we're really close already, typically I'll just let them have it, and then we just move into wrestling.
Yeah.
Right, because at that point you have two occupied hands, and I have empty hands with which to throw you. Or I grab my dagger in my pocket, one of the two.
Yeah. And a lot of swords aren't uniformly sharp either. The top third is usually the sharpest. The bottom half is a lot duller a lot of times because that's where you parry a lot. So you wouldn't want to be chipping your blade up in a really sharp portion.
Yep. I'm sorry, I couldn't quite catch it. You're a little far away. Yes. So you gotta let me get a longsword. Don't mind them. They're just stabbing each other. So I'll put the mic down, and I will demonstrate one of the sneakiest moves in all of HEMA. Tom, move forward a little bit. I don't want to isolate you. So both of those movements are in manuscripts, one of which is a simple one-handed thrust with your left hand to maximize reach. That one's really sneaky. And the other one, you actually threaten a high descending cut and then throw a terrifying cut down towards your opponent's leg. That one is actually called a whip strike or a Geislin. And it's pretty notorious in HEMA. You really got to watch out for it. Yes and no. I would say there are sword systems that are objectively more simple and easier to learn. But at the end of the day, once you get used to it, you're used to it, and it's not too terribly difficult to translate between the two. I would say if you're looking for easiest systems to learn, in my opinion, is military saber, because it was meant to be taught to a large group of people who have never held a sword before. So, you know, here's your 8-week boot camp, now go get good. Hard weapons to learn would be rapier. Rapier is a very, very delicate, very fine weapon with a lot of small motions. And while you're not doing a whole lot of things with it, you got to get really, really, really good at them. Longsword can be very difficult in the context of there's so many things you can do with it. So you just got a lot to learn. Okay, they're going to do saber. Yeah, I'll talk about saber. I know nothing about saber, so. I lied, I know a little bit about saber. So military saber is based mostly off systems from the Victorian and the Neapolitan era. So you're thinking like 1700s, 1800s, primarily used to train soldiers. And while you would think it's a very different weapon from sword and buckler, it's not so much that different because the buckler is just attached to your hand. Ooh. Oh. See, we didn't get too much into the history of military saber. That's more Justin's shtick. We'll probably talk about that more tomorrow during our panel. So if you want to hear more about military saber, come watch that. Otherwise, it's a very awesome discipline to learn. There's so many resources out there. There's tons of manuscripts from tons of different places. We actually have a manuscript written by George S. Patton in 1914. So if you're looking for like the most modern HEMA possible, that's kind of it. While they're fighting, any more questions? You there with the years. Yeah, so whichever your dominant hand is, that's the hand that holds the sword. Right, the sword hand has to do like really important, delicate things, and the buckler hand is essentially it's here, or it's here, or it's here, and you don't have to worry about it anymore because you're getting stabbed. So you really don't have to do much with the buckler other than put it in the way. In rapier and dagger, there is a lot more finesse with the dagger. Principle's still the same. Tip up, tip down, catch the other person's sword with it, then ventilate them with your own. Any more? Yeah. So most of the manuscripts are written from the context of a one-on-one fight, right? They're not really meant to cover battlefield. Those one-on-one fights could be duels for honor. They could be judicial duels that you're forced to fight for reasons. They could just be for sportsmanship, right? You could just, like, they do the same thing we do today. We're bored, so we go stab each other.
From the sportsmanship sense, do they have particular, say, rules or customs or like certain gear or something?
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, like there was plenty of duels where like you would go to first blood because you don't actually want to kill somebody, or like sportive fighting is actually fairly interesting. Is that the winner of the sportive fight was whoever got the other person to bleed from the scalp. So like you don't outright want to murder someone, but your goal is to hit them well enough to make them bleed.
So we have a few minutes left before the end of the segment, and I know we said this in the last one. These are training devices to simulate stress-induced training. Yes, that is a shock. Will it knock me out? No. Does it hurt? Yeah, it does. So it tingles, right? It's certainly, you know it happened, and I don't want it to happen, especially across sweaty parts of the body where that kind of enhances the shock. So we have these, and we use them, and they're a very different way of fighting. You can see we don't have gear on because gear doesn't simulate the attack, right? So we want to be in as little as we can. Usually we wear eye protection. We don't have it today, so we're going to go a little, more controlled. A lot like the dagger you saw, but again, I don't want that to hit me, right? So you guys can talk about it as you see fit.
So yeah, these are fun. They're straight up taser knives. Yeah, you'll notice they fight very different when it starts to hurt a lot.
I think the big thing to worry about when you do knife fighting is not so much if you'll get cut. You definitely will. It's more about how you cut the other person, or what you're willing to allow yourself have before you get the better of your opponent.
So, that it?
That's it.
Cool. There you go.
So you saw, if you watched us do the dagger fight while the guys were talking with the rondelles, we hit each other a lot, right? If you watched that, we didn't, because I don't want to get hit by that thing, and neither does she. You also saw us trapping each other's feet when we fought. Hopefully you caught that. That's something we like to do just because it's fun to trap your foot and then get them stuck, and usually she traps my foot and continues to stab until it just kind of keeps running out. Works. But I think we're good. All right, any other questions? Yes? How do you join? Cool. So we have a booth in Hall C. Got all kinds of weapons you can take a look at. ColumbusSaberAcademy.com is our website. We are located in Worthington on Lakeview Plaza Boulevard by where Roadrunner is, back just before the overpass, or the underpass. We have classes 6 days a week. As Justin said, we do military saber on Monday nights. Tuesdays I teach a longsword yoga, so yoga with a sword, and conditioning. Wednesday we do longsword with Rock's class. Thursday we have a beginners program that we just started. It's an 8-week program that takes you through all 3 of our primary weapons, all the basics that these guys teach. I take you through those so you can walk into their classes with a good background. Saturdays we have lightsaber for kids, lightsabers for adults in the morning. It's a nice gateway kind of weapon to get you into fighting. We should have brought them up here, we didn't bring them up. And then we also have 2 new additions, one that's been for a while, but one brand new addition to the school with a great friend of ours. She's doing Naginata. She has Columbus Naginata is the school. She's teaching at our place. It's amazing. And then Daniel Trout from Mach 1 Whips does bull whip on Sundays. So, and rapier on Saturdays. Jesus, sorry, with Matt. And rapier is on Saturday at 1 o'clock. So it's a membership. You get all that for included in the monthly fee. It's really cool, and we just do it because we have fun with it. This is none of our day jobs, right? We don't make a living off of this. We just do it because we love it, and we want to keep fighting as much as we can. It's a lot about community for us more than anything else. We're hanging out a lot, before class, after class. We go to tournaments. The tournaments are a blast. We love fighting new people that we haven't fought before and meeting new people, but it's also fun to afterwards hang out, get a drink, get some food, because you just met new friends that you're going to fight with tomorrow. Right? So that's what a lot of what HEMA really is. It's about community, and it's about getting better and personal growth of improvement. These guys talked a lot about the historical side of it. I love hearing it because that's not my thing. I can't sit and read the manual. I have too much attention issues, so I can't do it. But I love fighting it, so I love training with these guys because they help me get better as I do it. Because those techniques are there for a purpose, right? They worked. That's why they're written down. Anyway, any other questions before we close out? Yes.
Does being left-handed change how the fight goes, and is being left-handed a disadvantage?
You guys want to answer that?
Yeah, yes and no. It really depends on how you develop as a fencer. It can be harder. I mean, Alex over here, he's one of our students. He's a lefty. It feels very different fencing a lefty than it does, somebody who fences kind of mirror image of you. But it's another thing, though. There's advantages and disadvantages. There's certain ways that people can apply pressure on your arm, which is really annoying if you're a lefty. But also, you tend to put pressure back on them in ways that they're not used to. So if you never fight lefties, it's a huge advantage. If you have some friends that are lefties, it kind of is an advantage until we get used to each other.
I'm gonna say, end of the day, a lefty versus a righty, everyone's still fairly equal. It's just which one of you figures out you're a lefty versus a righty first. I would say the one weapon set that I can think of where it's really, really weird is sword and buckler, because then your swords are on the same side and your bucklers are on the same side. That can get really weird. So I was in a tournament earlier this year. I ended up going up against a lefty in sword and buckler, and my brain just completely short-circuited. Sword was on the wrong side of the body, my buckler was useless. I'm I don't know how to operate, and I basically just got hammered. So yeah, it can be an advantage definitely in the beginning, especially because you're mostly going to fight right-handed people who never fight lefties. But the moment you go up against another lefty, and that dynamic changes, it can become really hard on you.
Any other questions? You guys are awesome. Thanks for staying late.
Thank you guys for hanging out with us. Come out and visit us.